Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bit by Bit. I am Ben Bajarin.
I am Carolina Milanesi.
And I'm Max Weinbach.
Hello, team. We're coming off a fresh Pixel event, as by the title, everybody probably knows we're talking about Google Pixels, but we will also be talking about AI and platforms in general. Yesterday was Google's Pixel launch event, so launched by the Made by Google team, but there was also a lot of Android related news, so stuff that doesn't come to Pixel only, but obviously Android. But let's start with just the hardware. They pre-announced, whatever we call pre-announcing, they leaked some things. So the hardware was not a giant surprise. But people got to look and feel, they got to put a little bit more energy around some of the hardware designs. Obviously, the new Tensor G4 chip, which is ARM-based, and I will give a little bit of, I have an ARM polo on. Everyone, there you go, can see I'm a geek. And talking a little bit more about what their silicon enables full stack. But let's start with the hardware. I was there. I know. Yeah, I touched it. Yeah. Still touching it, perhaps, maybe. I don't know. Is that secret? But the reality is, like, in my opinion, these are the best Google Pixel hardware devices that I've ever used. I've complained, like, with every year, they're either too slippery, or I don't like the tactile feeling of, like, the edges, right? It's just there was always sort of something that bothered me. But these are the first ones when you pick it up that feel very one, nice hand feel, which I know we say this, tongue in cheek, but that matters. Like, it's gotta feel good in your hand, but it also has like some density to it. Like, it feels quality. There's obviously metal side edges, which are very iPhone-like. I would say if you pick it up and you've used a modern iPhone, it feels very, very much like the iPhone. Great displays, good size options, but hardware-wise, I was very, very impressed. I don't know if either of you have other sort of takeaways from what you saw on Twitter or the live stream.
I like the design. I know that is a bit of a, using a British term, Marmite thing. You either hate it or love it. But I do think that the camera bump is quite unique and, it's distinctive. And so you're going to be able to recognize that. And I think there's, there's elegance to it. I don't know what it's like when you put it down, but I would assume it's no different than when you put down, an iPhone, because the camera lenses at the back are protruding on the iPhone too. So I kind of like that look. I was disappointed that they didn't match my nail varnish, but that's a me problem.
They look much nicer this year, and especially the fold looking halfway competitive compared to last year's. I don't even know how to compare it, like describe it. It just was not that great. The hardware looks good. It looks like finally actually Google knows what they're doing for once. A little bit more HTC like actually too, which is what I was looking
at. That's true, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it reminds me of some of those older phones.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they were a little bit more subdued with the colors, and I wonder if that's intentional, to your point, Ben, about feeling more quality and maybe even with the base model for the Pixel trying to come across as more higher end.
Right, more pro. Nice. They definitely all, they definitely all have that same feel. But you're right, design wise, your entry level phones may typically have more of a wide color spectrum, and your higher end phones typically just a few, right? So I think design wise that makes sense. Ultimately, regardless of where you are in your Android life, this makes a pretty compelling upgrade. I agree with Max. The Fold was way better than before. I was next to our friend Anshul, who was taking pictures of his current Fold next to the new Fold, and you could just by side you could just see how drastic the design differences were. This was very much more similar to the new Samsung Folds in terms of size. People who were holding them, and I was holding a few side by side, very, very thin, very similar design. I think we're landing on the screen size, the form factor for these things in terms of what the front display is, and then what the size of the foldable is in hand. And honestly,
So how
like
different is it from a width perspective? Because I
so
didn't realize that they changed that
it's
drastically.
yeah, so it's so like with the Samsung, it's a little bit more candy barish. So maybe I forget the
Yeah,
dimensions of the screen, right? So it's thicker
Yeah,
than that.
it
It's
was like
thicker than
what,
that.
OnePlus Open.
Right. It's very much like the OnePlus Open in width size, with the exception of some fairly noticeable bezels, which I have pictures of and we can show in the video. But within those bezels shows up a little bit more just because of the contrast of the screen. But it's a very usable, like it feels like you're using a normal size smartphone, like a 6-inch smartphone, just when you're using it in folded mode.
yeah.
Now,
So
what's
that's
really
what I love.
interesting.
Sorry, I was going to say
What's
that's what I love about the One Plus.
exactly right, and it's thinner, and it's even thinner than that. So I stuck it in my pocket, and believe it or not, like it was actually thinner than my iPhone 15 Pro in my pocket. So like the pocketability of it was, for us that put them in our front pockets, was noticeably different than even other folds. Right, I put the prior fold in, it just did not fit. I obviously do it with my OnePlus Open. It's a little bit tight because it's a little thicker. The Samsung was better, the new Fold, but yeah, almost felt like a small normal Pro phone in my pocket. So I think we're getting to a point where that the OnePlus Open, the new Samsung Fold, that's roughly where I think we're aligning on screen sizes for or at least the form factor for folds. Obviously, there's other trade-offs, right? It's really expensive. The camera's not as good for. I still don't know why. Maybe Max can explain why. I still don't understand why the camera's not as
Yeah.
good. Like, do you not have the space? I don't know. Why am I paying $1,800 for $1,700 for a worse camera?
Yeah, it's actually larger sensors require more distance between the lens and the actual sensor, which makes it too thick to actually do it. Which is why the OnePlus Open has just the giant camera bump, which is annoying.
Yeah, but it makes
I
sense to have a
also
good
think
camera.
Yeah.
it does, but I think that we are a little fussy. Like, how
What?
good it has to be.
We're
Yeah, we
fussy?
are. I mean, no, like it's the same. If I take the Galaxy S24 and the recent Fold, the 6, the camera is not comparable, but it's pretty damn close, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's where I mean is like how good do you really, because it cannot be a compromise, but it's not your main driver to purchase. Do you know what I mean?
Let me give you this for the Pixel Fold at least. The camera sensor on the Pixel Fold 1, and I think it's the same on 2, is the same sensor as the Pixel 7a and 8a. So the $400, $450 phone has the same sensor as the what is it, $1,700, $1,800 phone. That just feels a little off.
I think the issue is at that price point, I would expect to make less trade-offs and we know what cameras are driving. Yeah, I agree with you. It's good enough, but I wonder like the early adopter who goes, well, I love the form factor, but I also want the best camera tech. Like that's a hard pill to swallow. And to be honest with you, I think I would have been okay, even with the size I put in my pocket, if they did what OnePlus does. Just make a little camera bump. Like I actually might have been okay with that. And I don't think it would have drastically changed that width feel in the hand. So I don't think that would have been a bad trade-off, but I get what they were going for, right? Just thinnest form factor in a foldable was clearly the design goal, and that came with trade-offs.
How much does AI though make up for it? Because I think that's the other part, right? How can they make up for that gap with
Yeah.
AI?
All right. Well, let's transition to that side.
See what I
So
did there?
they talked a lot about and there's a fundamental sort of approach here, right? I think we all agree that those who control platforms will integrate AI at a system level. And there's a difference between having system level integration and an app from a third party that has some cloud AI, right? Or native AI. So we'll start with that premise that essentially Google's in a position to take all of the things that they've done in deep learning over the years, translate those learnings in a wide way into just features. And there was a lot of it was weird. There was a lot of I think negativity. I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying, "Oh, I'm not impressed with the AI features," and I was like, "Okay, that's fine." But I think what we're looking for, and broadly, we don't know the answer to this, but I think there's some things Google did mention. We're looking for that thing where when a consumer sees it, they go, "You know what? That's a real problem I have. I don't even really, again, care if it's AI, but that's a problem I have, and what you've done helps me solve that." And I've always liked Google's positioning of like their value statement is we're trying to be the most helpful X, right? In this search, the most helpful email. Like that's their take. And so you could see it in some of the features that they showed, whether that was add me in photos, which I thought was super clever and feels like magic. Even the stuff that they've done for circle to search, that's very natural. That makes a ton of sense. So there's things where when you see it, again, you don't even perceive this is AI, but there is a lot of AI, machine learning, intelligence that goes into it. But I think their position is, we're just trying to make these things useful. In fact, they said from stage a quote that I liked, which was, we believe, right, from an AI standpoint, it exists to help people do the things they do every day, but easier. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like that's a great value proposition. So platform wise, was there anything that stood out to you as both as most kind of compelling uses of AI that maybe we didn't see before, or maybe we have seen before and they've just done a better job integrating it?
So I don't know about necessarily something that stood out other than the camera, but to your point about doing the things that you do every day, I agree with you. That's a real value. Unfortunately, it's not a sexy story, because you need to really use it and experience it in order for you to get that return. And I think that the problem that we have today is that we try and do things that, in my opinion, are not, yesterday I was joking. I said, I have to upgrade my life to get the return on the AI, because it's like, I don't know about you. Maybe Max. Like, I don't know how many parties you plan, right? Where you need to like do flyers and do invites and do whatever. Like maybe you do twice a year. I don't know. Like it's not something that every consumer is going to go, oh my God, I need that. And I think that's where we are. And not just Google, but, everybody that's trying to sell you AI today versus, to your point about the camera, whether it is the add me or I think it's made you look. I would have liked to have seen like a dog with the squirrel or a cat with the fish. The use cases of getting somebody's attention to try and get the best picture. I mean, I think those are the kind of thing that I'm going to use several times and is a real value, or it's solving a pain point. It's not planning somebody's birthday party.
Yeah. And you had the older Pixel features like Best Take, where you take 3 photos, it
Right.
imposes someone's face on there. On top of Add Me and everything else, it becomes a really compelling platform towards camera AI. Even the new Magic Editor, where it will fix your framing by just generating the rest of the image. That's really cool and useful.
Yeah,
So
framing around the group as well.
would we be in agreement that, I guess, sort of the camera specific features might be that kind of that hook, that thing that like those stand out enough that maybe that's the driver, and then other things that you start figuring out once you've made the decision that that's enough for you to be interested to buy, and then you start trying Gemini in search or Gemini in voice. Like those aren't the hooks. They get you there over time, but maybe the camera stuff is what really gets you in, kind of excited about these new AI features.
I think the camera is the easiest and widest kind of net that you can cast. And I say easiest because I think some of the interactions that they tried, it was pretty amazing, the level of conversational AI that we witnessed during the demos. But there's a component there that is linked to how much data you want to share. Yeah, whether it is my calendar, and so you can see my appointments or whatever. And that's not just Google, that is for Apple too, right? But that's where you start to test more of the comfort of the user versus on the camera side. I think nobody's thinking too much about, okay, well, what does this mean? Where does this picture go? What do they see, or anything like that?
Yeah. The other thing with like the camera and a lot of those hooks there, that's really more of like a Pixel. This is why you would get a Pixel over any other Android phone,
Right.
not Android as a platform, which I think is an interesting one, where Gemini is Android platform, period, and then all the good Pixel AI is, Pixel. They're keeping that for themselves, and everything else is just anyone gets access no matter what device. It's all data center based, but you can use it.
Right. So just for clarity, Max, explain. So they started off with Android specific features. Some of that was Gemini,
Yeah.
obviously some search. Maybe just break down what's coming broadly to Android versus what's we know is Pixel specific.
So a lot of this ends up coming down to subscriptions. So every Android user gets access to Gemini, just like you would on the web, using the 1.5 Flash model. Everyone gets access to that, and it can go grab your email and summarize things for you, create calendar events, search, whatever. Then the more specific ones are if you have Google One for 2 terabytes of storage, which you need to access Gemini Advanced, you get access to Magic Editor. They haven't said whether the new framing features or texting to it to be able to do that is going to just Pixel or everyone, but Magic Editor is available on iPhone, Android, as long as you have that. Gemini Advanced, which is just a little bit better with Gemini Live, so you can speak to it, is every Android device, no matter what. It can read your emails, respond to text, you can upload screenshots to it. That's every Android device from, I think, Android 8 up until now 15. And then the specific Pixel features are AdMe, all of the older ones, the super res zoom now, where you can zoom into a photo after the fact, and I think that should roll out today to the Pixel 8 and 9s, where image upscaling, all the editing features, and I think more or less anything that was specifically around the camera is just Pixel 9. But Gemini Advanced is anything. You can access it on your iPhone. Gemini Live, the conversational one, is going to be on your iPhone in the coming months.
At a price. And I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
because
$20 a month and includes 2 terabytes of storage.
Correct. So for Pixel, they're actually giving you, was it a year or
1
6
year
months?
for free.
1 year.
1 year free.
Yeah. Which is amazing in my view, because I think, I was thinking about connectivity and how, we all been telling vendors that they need to add connectivity to PC for free for a period of time to hook people up. It's the same thing with AI, right? From an advanced perspective, you need to get, and it should be the same for Microsoft, being able to give you advanced features of Copilot with a Copilot Plus PC for free for a certain amount of time. And I thought that was very clever to do it with Pixel, because if you're really interested in AI and you have to make a decision, a year free is quite compelling.
Yeah, and somewhat related, if you pre-order a Pixel Watch 3 with LTE, you get 2 years of cellular data regardless of your carrier included.
That's smart. Yeah, good hooks on those things. So I think it's clear, right? The distinction that they're making is there's things that's just good for Google search and Google services that will come to kind of everybody. Then it feels like some of these perhaps more hardware specific things, because that's camera related hardware, that's tensor related silicon, those advanced features that are bound more toward hardware are kind of the differentiating line that's coming to Pixel, I think, is kind of the philosophy that they're using to distinguish these capabilities.
And it was interesting how several times they said Pixel is the platform to showcase Google AI, right? Gemini. Right. It used to be that Pixel was the platform to showcase Google services, and now it's transitioned to Google AI, which obviously also benefits the services part.
Yes, good call.
And
all right, so
after
let's talk.
After a year of using Gemini, As I say, after you're using Gemini, you basically have no choice but to continue the subscription, especially if you're given 2 terabytes of storage where it uploads all your photos to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So good segue into platforms. So there's a couple of things that I'm interested about here. I did walk away from this event with a continued and deepened conviction of something I know the three of us have talked about before, which is really once you go deeply down into a services hole of Apple, Google, and then maybe we can say Microsoft, it becomes really hard to leave that now with AI. Like I feel like AI is even stickier than anything else perhaps we've seen before. Because again, if it's using your emails and you found it super valuable, you're not leaving Gmail, right? And say that perhaps Apple pulls this off and Apple Mail becomes super useful for summaries, like you're going to keep using that, right? So I think this just deepens you down the platform hole. We may even see drastically less switching going on. We already don't see it much at all, but we might see drastically less in this coming sort of era with AI. So just sort of broadly, let's just broadly talk platforms. How do we kind of see where Google's going here? Deep integration with Android, Apple, with iOS, and obviously, we can throw some Microsoft conversations here because they'll bring these features as well. They've shown some of them, but there's obviously more they can do to the PC side, because I think all three of them are in the position, right, that we started off in the beginning, which is deep system level integration with AI, but they all sort of are taking a little bit of a different approach.
I think it depends, the answer to your question depends on how interested is Google going to be in making some of these features available across other platforms too. Because in the past, if you think about their services, like you get a very good experience on, Google Maps on an iPhone as an example, right? They've been pretty agnostic and they're going after the users because they know that's what matters to them. They're not so, yes, obviously, if you're on Android, they prefer it, but as long as you're a user of their services, they're fine with it. And considering the approach that Apple has, that ChatGPT is only one of the AIs that is going to be available on their products, I think they went as far as calling out Gemini in the conversation after the event. So we know something is coming to iOS. The question is going to be how, integrated is that, and is going to be just benefiting the Google services within the Apple ecosystem versus the Apple ecosystem as a whole, which I think is how it's going to be. So I think that from a user perspective, is really more about how you choose hardware and staying in an ecosystem because of the hardware versus the services. So do I buy the iPhone because I care about the iPhone per se versus I care about Mail and Keynote and whatever else that I use within the Apple ecosystem? And I think it's a little different for everybody. And then the other question is also, how many devices do you have in that in that ecosystem? Because that's where, from an AI perspective, there's opportunity. Max and I were talking earlier following a tweet about switching, and you said, Ben, the AI is going to make it even stickier, which I agree with you. But that's where also from, if you're Samsung, if you own multiple devices, you're able to maybe deliver an AI experience that goes across those devices. So within that ecosystem, you deliver an extra layer versus just from a service perspective. So I think it depends what kind of user you are. It's a long-winded answer to a question.
Well, and so there's two parts to this too. So I wrestle with, and I say this with the caveat that we still have no idea what consumers broadly find valuable with any of the, let's just say, communication / email rewriting searching, etc. But what intrigues me about Google is, they do have kind of everything in-house that both Apple and Microsoft do not have in-house, right? They have a gigantic model and arguably the best organized framework of knowledge on the internet of anybody. So what I'm torn with is basic features for summarization, rewriting, all these sort of things that we're seeing, right? Just basic kind of help, simple, natural language engagement with the bot. Is that enough at a system level? Because I think we would all agree, right? If Apple doesn't have a gigantic model, they're not going to let OpenAI or anybody else integrate at the system level if it's not theirs. And arguably Microsoft could be in a little bit of a similar boat, right? Let's say that Search GPT becomes a thing. And then, chat, like how deeply will Microsoft take that to the system level when they don't own it? I don't know. Maybe they'll be more liberal than Apple, but Google's got all of that. They've got small language models. They've got all the computational photography. They know, language. They've got the web. And I just wonder, how big of an advantage is that to have all of that? Because that's the point they kept saying, right? We're full stack. We've got it all. We've got the software, the infra, and the cloud. We've got everything we need to bring this to device. How big of a deal is that as a differentiator at a system level where, again, iOS, Apple, and Microsoft just don't have all of the parts of the puzzle that Google does?
The other thing I wonder is, if you're using Google services, do you necessarily need it at a system level? Because if you're already using Gmail, you already use Google Maps on like an iPhone, for example, you don't necessarily need it at a system level because it can still grab from your account. So let's say Google wants to sell Gemini as a service and Apple allows Gemini to work with Apple Intelligence. Is there really any net difference to the user to have those system level hooks if it can just grab from all of your data already?
Yeah, I'm with Max on this one because I do think that is the real value of using something like Gmail, right? It doesn't matter if I'm on my phone, on my PC, on a Chrome device. It is the same experience across all of that, and it allows me to actually go across ecosystems at a minimum, right? Because you might be a Pixel or an iPhone, so you might be Android or iOS. But then the PC comes in because there are more people with a PC on Windows than there are with either a Mac or a Chrome, the Chromebook. So I do think that for some users, that ability of going across is going to be the real thing. At the same time, I do think that general query is not as much of a hook as it is my personal part. So if I look at, which again, to your point, Ben, that's something that Google can do because they kind of know me across the board, the same as Apple does, but Apple doesn't have the ability to do that general search, which is why ChatGPT comes in. But to my point is the personal stuff, in my view, is the one that is more valuable to the human being, and the one that you're least willing because of privacy concerns or because of where your stuff actually sits to share across. So yes, I can go to ChatGPT, Gemini, whoever to summarize an article, but then I want my calendar and the route to wherever I'm going be done only in a specific app or in a specific device because I don't want anybody to know where I live and where I work or whatever the case might be.
A good point for Apple Intelligence, because Gemini is still happening at a data center. Any of these new Gemini Advanced features still happen on a data center. The only things using the new Gemini Nano multimodal is text correction, the new screenshots app, and a few other things here, the weather app. But most things are still going to the data center at whatever one's closest to you with a bunch of TPU units running Gemini 1.5 Pro. That's still happening even if it's on your Pixel because the models just can't run locally large enough to do it. And that's where Apple's really, it works out well where you have the secure cloud and it runs on device for almost everything. Can't do as much, but at least it's secure.
So okay, I think those are those are good points. I think it's really going to come down to how much these services really need to know, like, let's just say, intimate things about me to increase in their value, and then who can gather that. Because I agree with you on paper, Google probably knows me pretty well. Does it know me as well as Apple? I don't know, but it may not be that far off, even though I'm sure Apple would disagree with us. But it might be closer than people think. So I think that's a fair point. But then how does Microsoft fit into this when I would argue that Microsoft does know me, but probably more from a business
A productivity
context, right,
perspective.
than
Yeah.
a personal context, I guess.
Yeah, that's the argument, not argument, but the conversation I was having yesterday on Twitter, because I said, made the point that the challenge for Microsoft is that they don't have, a phone platform, and so they're a guest on somebody else's ecosystem to some extent. And I think that the answer I got was like, well, Microsoft from a productivity perspective, because they're within 365, know you and can deliver value. And it's like, I agree, but they don't know everything. And so like you're limited in the value that you see as a user to that productivity slash creativity, call it what it is, right? But you're not, like, you have very little knowledge about the content I consume, whether it's music or video or, movies or whatever. You have very little knowledge of what I'm like at home, where maybe, I would argue when it comes to me, Amazon is the one who knows more, right? Because I have eco devices everywhere, and I consume content on them. So I think that it seems like we're going back to the problem that Microsoft has always had. It knows me 9 to 5,
Right,
and
right.
that's where it ends.
Yes. Yes, I'm not
The question is, do
sure.
you think they can break through that into, daily consumer user habits outside of work? I think so many people are just, oh, it's Microsoft Office, Outlook. I'm using this from 9 to 5, shutting it off immediately and not touching it till the next day or next Monday, whatever. That it's hard for anyone, even if Microsoft has more compelling features, to even want to get near a Microsoft app because they're so used to using it for exclusively work.
Which I thought it was interesting that they decided to do the back of shirt deal for Copilot Plus PC with Qualcomm on Manchester United, because I took that as almost like a commitment, if you like, to really bring Copilot to a more consumer, um, you know, uh, sphere or audience than it has been so far. And even the fact that they started to engage with more consumer focused creators like Justine and Jenna, as an example. I clearly they're thinking about this.
I wonder, I mean, this is not the world we live in, but I do wonder if Microsoft had like the best AI engine that everybody wanted to use just holistically. I know they don't. I'm just saying, like, I wonder if that would have tipped the scales toward this problem of, they just don't have their services universally used for the entirety of that person's life across all platforms. And that's where I just wonder if maybe they had that. Yeah, then theirs is better than Google's and Apple's, so I'll use that, AI agent slash assistant on whatever device I choose. I just wonder if that would have been the only way to change this, because it feels like they're still just going to be stuck on services on the PC side and maybe skew more, like you said, Carolina, to my 9 to 5. I think it's going to be a hard struggle to get out of that.
Yeah, the only thing that I think plays in their favor is the time we're in, where especially for knowledge workers, um, you know, the work and life is much more blended. I've been arguing this for a long time, that it's not about balance, it's about blending. If you look at my calendar, I want to see the whole calendar. It's not just work calendar. It is, maybe that is what plays in their favor. But I also feel that personal part is, as far as the value of AI, is still right now told through the lens of my employer when it comes to Copilot versus me as a user. And I think until that shift changes to making it useful for me, it's going to be really hard.
Right.
Have you found any features that really feel like they are useful for users? Everything feels like it's research or learning or simplifying complex topics, but people aren't doing that day to day outside of work.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, this goes back to the point I made earlier about, how many parties are you planning, or how many holiday trips are you planning?
Yeah, and it might be one of those things where it's really just, it's the sum of the parts, right? Maybe at the end of the day, you use AI for 15 minutes a day. I don't know. Maybe at some point in time, it's 30 minutes a day, or maybe it's to the point where you just give it a prompt and you leave it alone and it goes and does its thing and you come back later. And that just speaks to the premise where the value proposition, like we said at the beginning, is just help everyday people do everyday tasks and do it simpler. And you're right, Carolina, that's not sexy, but for a lot of people, it's like, I don't want to search for 25 minutes on a topic, like make that 5 minutes, right? So I think there's a value prop there, but this leads me to something that I think is very interesting about this moment in time. And I'm to be honest with you, I'm a little bit confused why companies aren't doing more here relative to the user experience. These things, like we've been using, Apple Intelligence. I tried a host of features on the Pixel at the event yesterday, and coming from it from the perspective, which I don't know how much of this is unique to just being a bit of an early adopter, but like you get a new device and you want to try the new thing. Like that's the first thing you want to do. And I could not figure out how to do all these things that Google just showed. I had no idea. I was like, how do you do this add me feature? Where's Gemini again? Oh, it's an app, but it's not that clear. So I guess the question is, like, one, a little bit of a user interface problem on how you make it clear.
It's similar to Apple Intelligence, right? Because we were like, hold on, how do I? Yeah.
Right. But I wonder why there's no onboarding. Like, why is there no, like, let me give you a quick demo of this cool experience and then try it for yourself?
Yeah, but that would be ironic, right? So you're telling me
that's true.
AI is the thing that is going to make my experience easier, and yet you need a manual to figure out how to do that.
I get it, but that's why I'm saying, like, we're in this weird situation where it's actually not that obvious. Like, to use the feature we think is interesting, it's not that. And so that's what I'm saying. I find it interesting that, like, the first thing you want to do is try the new AI things, and it's not that easy. If it's just a new camera feature or a better picture, open the camera, take the picture. Like, that's what I was trying to do. With AI, it's a little bit tricky. And so we're in this weird UI phase where there's no standardization of how you even do rewrite, edit, summary. It's different on every platform. And there's kind of, the discoverability is much more tricky than I think I assumed it would be.
And I don't think the answer is what Microsoft is doing on the new Copilot Plus PCs, where while your PC is loading everything that it needs to load, you see the static, pictures that you go through and read, because nobody wants to do that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, all these phones have the Tips app that no one ever touches or uses. And I guess it kind of does it, but maybe force someone to go through that the first time or skip it when they're setting up their phone. I think Pixel, when you set it up, it puts in like the widget right in the top corner. Click here to look at everything your Pixel can do. But no one knows that, and everyone's not paying attention to that. You're getting your apps installed. And by the time the apps are installed, the pop-up's gone.
Yeah. It's still all our fault. I mean, most time it is, right? It's all down to the user.
Well, we'll see.
Companies don't make nice UI.
Yeah, exactly. But I say all of that, though, just to sort of make the point about how early we are in this cycle. There's very little standardization of a workflow, so fine, but there's also, the discoverability / usability. I think as companies work this out, will get better. It's just the state of where we're at. They're working them into the features,
Which
but
is
it's
why
unclear.
nobody's going to walk into a store asking for AI.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Good discussion. I think that was fairly holistic. So good chatting. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will talk to you next time.